Hi, how are you doing today? My name is Dr. India White, and I am a TEDx speaker, author of over 40 books, and a co author with Big Ideas Learning, National Geographic Learning, Cengage Learning. And I'm excited to be here today with you to talk about equity in the classroom. And so I have a presentation that I want to do, and it's called Equity Counts Successful Implementation of Equity in the Classroom. This is a presentation slash course that's going to help you. So in a minute, I'm going to share my screen with you guys so that you can uh, partake in this with me. So I'm going to start from the beginning, and we are going to talk about equity and how equity counts. So again, the name of the session is Equity Counts Successful Implementation of Equity in the Classroom. Now, a little bit about me. I am a TEDx speaker, a national education consultant, and a co-author with Big Ideas Learning, National Geographic Learning, and Cengage Learning. I love what I do. I love helping students. And, I had a wonderful time in the classroom, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Now, this is some of the order of our presentation. We'll talk about some research and equity. We'll talk about educational strategies. We'll talk about implicit and explicit biases. We'll talk about the influence of relationship building, and then we'll have a conclusion. And then if you guys have any questions or follow up, I will give you my contact information. Okay. So first things first, again, about me. Yes, I am a Sarasota native in Florida, TEDx speaker. I'm an author of over 40 books, first generation, three-time graduate of University of Florida, majoring in math and leadership, and then my doctorate was in educational leadership and in administration. I was a 2022 Gators 40 Under 40 honoree. I've been a former math teacher and a math coach of grades 6 through 12 in public schools. I was a former high school administrator in public schools. I'm a mother of two published authors in grade school. They are doing very well. They are fifth and seventh grade going into sixth and eighth. So I'm excited. I love playing saxophone. And guess what, guys? I can't sew and I can't really sing. So that's a little bit about me. Now, let's talk and reflect and discuss, what does equity mean to you? So I want you to take 2 minutes to really write down your thoughts and think about it as you are watching this presentation. What does equity mean to you? We hear so many different, you know, we hear so many different interpretations of what equity is, but I want you to really reflect and discuss and think about what that means to you. Okay. And then we're going to now continue. So the definition of equity, it says it's to be fair and impartial. That's what the dictionary says. Now, equity means, according to the National Council of Teachers in Mathematics, that there should be reasonable and appropriate accommodations provided as needed for all students. That was in their article 2000, year 2000, and is still very um, uh, well referred to because that is definitely the goal for equity. Now, with that being said, I want to talk a little bit to you guys about equality versus equity and how we're striving for liberation. So equality says that everybody, pretty much gets everything equal given to them in the classroom. If a student, if they need books, they all get the same book. If they need, school supplies, they all get a pencil and a piece of paper, and that's it. We've done our part. Whereas equity says, no, let's take a look and see what other needs does the student have. Is the student a student with a disability? Do they have a wheelchair? Maybe I need to provide a ramp so that they can get to class. Is the student a multi-language or English learner? Maybe I need to provide support as interpreters to go in the classroom and to help them translate. Is the student deaf and hard of hearing? Well, then maybe I need to provide someone that could go in and really give them what they need as well, whether that's a sign language interpreter or whatnot. So that's what equity does, is it looks for the specific needs of students and it meets them where they are to provide those specific and appropriate accommodations as needed so that we can set these students up for success. Liberation says, okay, not only do I want to provide you with these resources, I want you to now thrive and soar in the classroom. I want you to go beyond any invisible barriers, any physical barriers that might be in place that are stopping you or impeding your academic success. So liberation goes a step further, make sure all students are free. And then, of course, I want you guys to think too about, where do you see yourself at as an educator, as a leader, when it comes down to providing equity or liberation for your students. Now let's keep going. So I want to talk a little bit about the research. So educational history created the achievement gap, if you think about it. So we're going to talk about what's going on. And it didn't just create the achievement gap, but it kind of contributed to what's going on in regards to the achievement gap. So in their book, Reducing the Gap, Successful and Achievement of African American Students, Robert Slavin and Nancy Madden from Johns Hopkins University, they found that in order for the gap to decrease, various measures, along with an understanding of educational history, had to be in place. Some of the things, even include, the process of desegregation, where we talked about Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. Also, when you're talking about that, you can go right into the NAEP scores. NAEP, the National Report Card, has always been a go-to for us when it comes down to gathering data of how various subsets of students are performing in the nation. And so we found here that the NAEP scores of 2005 said that the reading achievement of whites was unchanged, and some changes began to improve for Black and Latino students in 1970s and 80s, but there are still some significant gaps. We're going to talk about those gaps even further in the presentation, but I just want to let you know, this is like where we really started breaking ground and saying, okay, this is what the data is really looking like. And then, of course, looking at the schooling for African Americans, it went from abysmal to merely bad. And then, of course, it continued, our society continued to emerge from Great Society programs, including desegregation in Title I. And then African Americans attended school far less funded than their white peers. So there was like, an economic effect as well that took place that affected the achievement gap. So these are some things that, we can acknowledge. But I also want to now talk a little bit about the findings of equity and access in research. So findings show that students that are living in poverty tend to have teachers who are not as proficient in teaching math. Further, these students, they reside in underserved areas of poverty. So this is definitely true. If you think about the normal or any type of math class or reading class or whatnot, you'll see students that are assigned to maybe algebra or intensified or remedial algebra class is not, their professor or their teacher is not necessarily going to have the skill set of the teacher that is teaching calculus or teaching Cal 2. And this goes to show it could be that maybe the calc teacher has more certifications, maybe they have more years of experience in that school or in the district. And so unfortunately that does happen, and it's pockets of places throughout the nation that this does happen. And it's an area of focus for that, for us to be able to really start providing more equitable access to these wonderful instructors that usually kind of hide out in the calc realm of math classes. All right, now let's keep going. Now, this is what I really wanted us to talk about. So the data doesn't lie. I have heard so many educators ask about the achievement gap and what is it going to take to close it and how many years and whatnot. So I got together with my team at the Department of Education in Florida, and we were able to compile this data. And so unfortunately, and I'm going to look at Florida, for instance, here, but it shows that the data, it doesn't lie. Let's look at the numbers. It says data-driven instruction practice. It's needed to make proper decisions for making learners and efforts to close or decision making for learners and efforts to closing the achievement gap. And in Florida alone, guys, take a look at this data. It's going to take up to the year 2237 to close the achievement gap in math for students of color, Black students and their peers. And it's going to take 123 years for Hispanic learners to have their gap closed with their peers. This is very disturbing, and it should be. Why? Look at these numbers. We won't see the gap close when it comes down to our children. And that was in math. If you look at reading, it's going to take 221 years to close that. That's the year 2241. And then for, Hispanics and their peers, it's going to take 79 years. That's the year 2099. The sad part is many of us won't live to see this gap closed. And I want you to take a moment and just think about these numbers and think about this data. Start asking yourself, what can I do to be a catalyst for change? And what can we do different in this nation so that these numbers will decrease and this gap will eventually close? So again, like I said, in the math area, that's 217 years from now for Black students for that gap to close, and 123 years for Hispanic learners for that gap to close. And the reason why we chose Hispanic and Black learners compared to their peers was because those were the demographic learners that really attributed to the gap significantly more than other races. Now, I want to continue going with you. Let's talk about the achievement gap a little bit more. Like in Florida, for instance, we had scores across the state of Florida that reflected the achievement gap grades K-12. These are some of the results that we were able to find here. As you can see here, you had 34% were proficient. African Americans were proficient in math compared to 65% of their peers who were of European descent. Okay, and then you could just keep going and look at here at the data in English, and language arts, it was 34% again versus the 63% of their peers, And then, of course, science, it was 35% versus 67%. And then social studies, you had 50% proficient versus 78% proficient to their peers. And so now, if you look at the state regarding Hispanic learners, you'll find here that 49% were proficient in math compared to their peers, Caucasian peers, which were proficient at a rate of 65%. Okay. And then, of course, if you look at English, language arts, you'll see that 48% of Hispanic learners were proficient compared to their peers who were proficient at 63%. And then, of course, 62% for science, and then 49% for social studies. And then you see the numbers there. So unfortunately, we do see that the gap, it still exists in both subsets of learners. And we have to do our part to close this gap as soon as possible so that the significant data will decrease. So how do we then successfully implement equity and access? Well, we've got to be intentional about inclusion. Inclusion is not always race-based. Inclusion is making sure all learners feel like they are a part, making sure that all student voices are heard, making sure we're strengthening the math identity and the identity of students for students in our class, no matter their background, no matter, if they just moved to the state, no matter, if they are behind a couple of grades. We have to make sure that we're giving our students a strong sense of belonging and inclusion so that their voices are heard and they can contribute to math discourse and feel like they have a chance to be proficient in your classroom. Further, we want to be proactive at implementing diversity in groups. So whenever we have group settings, it is imperative that we are intentional in making sure that we blend it so that various voices are heard at various tables. We want to make sure representation is key. Further, being empathetic and compassionate is amazing, and it will do wonders in the classroom. Taking a time to slow down to say, okay, I wonder how it really feels to be in, student A's shoes or student A's situation. I wonder what they really are bringing to the classroom. Taking that extra time to be compassionate and to care and to listen to them, being an active listener, making sure that we're advocating for these students that usually don't have a voice or usually are being, unfortunately, maybe they've experienced some targeting. Whereas, they really need a voice. They need someone to really kind of vouch for them. And, we could be the key. Being a leader of second chances. So making sure that, whenever there is an infraction that might have taken place with the student, in particular, students of less represented subset groups of students, that we are intentional as to how we can provide second chances and providing restorative practices, looking at positive behavior intervention systems and whatnot to make sure that our classroom is a place that's safe for learning and a place where students can make mistakes and get back up again. We want to make sure that we're looking for an opportunity to help learners grow. What are we doing to make them think outside of the box? Are we, giving them, extra practice as they are climbing that metacognitive ladder? And are we introducing them to higher order thinking? Are we approaching that opportunity gap and making sure that our students have a fair chance to be exposed to the curriculum at grade level and beyond grade level so that they can, thrive when it comes down to really showing their proficiency later on assessments and later in their future courses? And then, of course, always thinking outside of the box. What can we do? Can you do project-based learning? Can you pair up with other educators? Can you pair up with the community to make sure that you are doing what you can to engage your students and to have them connected in the classroom? These are some things that you can do to make sure that you're successfully implementing equity and access in the class. Now, I want to talk a little bit too about innovative teaching strategies. So Davis and Fedina, they did some research on this. Now, the definition is that it's strategies that will help with engagement and classroom management. So how can we do this? So innovative strategies, it's a new approach to the deconstruction of educational trends to build upon educational experiences. So, they Valverde, Barosco, you have all of these wonderful researchers here. They found that COVID caused 1.5 billion students and 63 million teachers to become innovative in the art of teaching. Also, they found that the e-learning market was worth $243 billion in 2022, which means that there is ample support and financial fiscal support towards e-learning. So leaders must find a way to educate within the way of work. And so some things that we can do here is look at the three pillars of sustainable e-learning, which talks about resource management, educational attainment, professional development, and innovation, strategies for adapting to change. And so these are some things that are at our fingertips as leaders that can help us to really kind of be more innovative when it comes to e-learning. Check out that new course, or create a course online for your students, or look into the supplemental courses and supplemental work that your students can do to prove their proficiency and to really increase their engagement in the classroom. Now, I want to also talk about e-learning and e-learning design. So, e-learning design, diverse studies discovered by Valverde Barosco and her team, and their team. They identified 3 principles and 9 framework elements for sustainable e-learning design. So, stakeholder centeredness, cost effectiveness, and high operational efficiency. So, basically, having international program standards, having a costing model, and a learning object repository, and having other things like project management that was ready available as they're designing e-learning programs. So if your school district is not necessarily keen on e-learning, these are some things that they can look into to really kind of meet with their district leaders and see can we make this a part of our fabric in our school and how we're educating students. Now, some e-learning priorities, Anku and Kakir, they found in their studies of online learning that there were 4 priorities in research, and that was enhancing learning, engagement, and collaboration, students, promoting efficient facilitation with teachers, and developing assessment techniques, and developing assessment techniques and designing faculty development programs. So these areas were related to the dependent variables that should be the object of study and research on e-learning, learner achievement, learning engagement, and learner retention. So these are some things that were prioritized when it came down to e-learning. Now, I want to now talk to you guys about theories and factors towards persistence and retention. So we found that the student integration theory model by Tinto and also by John Bean, the student attrition theory model, they talked about the characteristics of individuals and the factors towards retention. Okay. And then, of course, Tinto talks about integration and institutional match, how these things all contributed to student achievement and student retention, students being able to stay in school and persist. So we also found within the studies and within their theories, we also found that there are factors on achievement that self-esteem and self-efficacy were directly related to positive outcomes and persistence. Gloria and Ho, they both, in their research came up with this. Further, academic achievement, we found that there was higher academic preparation and it had a higher positive correlation to persistence in college for students, in particular, first generation students. Also, 22% of whites had calculus as their highest math course in high school, compared to only 17% of Hispanic learners and 16% of African American or Black learners. And that was provided by the National Center of Education Statistics. Now, those are interesting facts. So now, how does all of this tie into the academic achievement mindset? Well, let's continue to look at the research. Research conducted by Duckworth, Dazzler, Hodge, Wright, and their team. It all showed that grit is an attribute that has a positive correlation in the academic achievement of college scholars. I know also firsthand, I was able to find from first generation students as well, in colleges as well, that grit was a determinant factor and a key to their success. Now, Hodge et al., they found that grit and productivity was a part of the entire process of academic achievement. Okay. Um, I was able to find that whenever engagement and grit are combined, grit has a direct effect on this relationship, and it becomes a grit engagement productivity relationship, which led to higher standardized test scores. Duckworth found that, students defy the odds, and that out of all attributes somebody may attribute to their success, grit is the one that mattered the most. And she wrote about it in her book called Grit. So now let's talk about strategies for critical thinking and creativity. So whenever you're looking at strategies, it also applies, it is also applied learning, which is based on multidimensional research and perspectives and reliability, as well as the importance of immediate feedback and having attention to individual needs of students, and even looking at the design of activities that promote critical thinking and creativity. These are all great strategies that are used for critical thinking and creativity. Also, looking at concepts of self assessment for students, making sure that they understand where they are, where are they in their learning, where do they feel strong, where do they need more support. Also, looking into peer assessment. This is great for creativity and for critical thinking. Students learn very well from their peers, and their peers have a strong influence on their ability to achieve and perform in the classroom. Looking at automated assessments, that also was identified as a key strategy for critical thinking and creativity for students. Now, where do we find equity and access in math programs? So if you look at various resources, you'll find it in these resources, including graphic organizers. They'll help students to construct visual understanding of concepts. You've got vocabulary flashcards. Those are available in print and they're interactive. So you've got them on various platforms, whether it's like Quizlet or other online platforms that will help you with that. You can also create them in various digital platforms, like whether it's like Canva or whatnot. You can really go and create those flashcards for students. Assessments. This is another way that you can really tap into equity and access, right? So you can have them in print, or you can have them editable and resources. You can have them on a digital platform where teachers can customize them through activity builders and whatnot. You have differentiation. So where you're teaching the daily skills and concepts of students with a different approach for emerging, proficient, and advanced learners, making sure that you are meeting the needs of all learners as you're teaching and having a moment of instructional delivery. Also, communication to parents of English language learner students or English learners. So you're communicating whether it's through newsletters, family letters, and through the website through multiple languages, making sure that you might use, whether it's Google Translate or another appropriate source of communication to make sure that students from various diverse linguistic backgrounds can be on the same page as their peers. Now, continuing on, some other places that we can find digital supports or equity and access in math programs includes digital platforms. You can also support through visual and audio helps, auditory helps. There's STEAM content. You can do STEAM videos, or you can, have other STEAM curriculum embedded within the program. You can have glossary and videos in various languages. Further, you can have some resources of online tutors for students within a program. And then, of course, there are various apps that can help students, like whether it's a homework app or, solutions app, things like that, so that students can feel that they're not just floating without that extra support, especially when they leave the classroom. This is how we can really find programs that will support equity and access. Now we're going to continue, and we're going to talk about acknowledging and acting on biases. So, yes, the way that you do this, so everyone has biases. It's just a part of being a human. But how do you acknowledge these, and how do you act upon them in a way that is conducive for learning and really will benefit you as a leader and benefit students in the classroom? So first things first is having a perspective and empathy for all learners, realizing that students will come from all walks of life and parents are really giving schools the best that they have. And all we can really do is work with them at the level that they are at. All the all Also another thing that we want to do is we want to realize also that color blindness, when we say I don't see color, um, do we really not see color, or what are we really trying to say? Are we really trying to say that, although we see color, we're going to celebrate color and we're going to judge someone by the content of the character versus, the outside container of that individual, their skin color, their features or whatnot. So I think just being more sensitive in some of the verbiage and the terminology that we're using as well will help support us as we are acknowledging and acting on our biases. Further, own our biases and then make steps to change. So there's tests that you can take from Harvard. They have like a Harvard aptitude test where it judges like your biases and whatnot, and it helps with that. You can look at that. You can look at your explicit biases, your implicit biases, and then of course, then moving forward from bias to inclusion, being very intentional as to, okay, I have a bias, so I've kind of shunned that person away, or I've shunned that particular type of person away, that particular type of student away. But now I'm going to be intentionally inclusive to make sure that I'm including that child in instruction, in group work, in being a leader, coming up to the board, showing their knowledge, being able to read out loud and things like that. Now, I want to now jump over to also being proactive versus retroactive. So instead of saying, oh, I'm just going to wait for some kind of event, no, I'm going to be proactive at making sure that I am addressing these biases so that I can grow as a leader and be a better fit and serving the needs of all learners. And then, of course, welcoming the idea of introspection and reflection. After you get done teaching, after you get done leading, take a moment to reflect. Get a journal, write it out. Take a moment and have introspection. Look within. What's going on? How do I really feel about this? Is this tough? Is this challenging to me? What can I do different? Okay. Don't beat yourself up. Just learn from it and continue to grow as a leader. Maybe you have to do a book study. Maybe you have to look into other things and see how you can, best evolve as a leader as you're helping learners. Now, we're going to now talk about relationship building and how we can use that to advance equitable instruction in the classroom. So relationship building, while being culturally responsive in education, as well as methods for helping teachers and communities build relationships with students of color, is key. Because research found that students of color, they connected with leaders that they could relate to and leaders who were empathetic. This helped them to perform better academically. Hewitt and Ma found that research in 2010. And then, of course, Nora and Chris, they spoke about 4 domains of mentoring, which are psychological, emotional support, goal setting and career paths, academic subject and knowledge support, and having a role model. Our students need this more than ever, especially in these areas. And so these are some things that we can do to advance equitable instruction when it comes down to relationship building in the classroom. Some other solutions include providing comprehensive reform models. We don't hear a lot about this, but this really is where we hit the ground running and where we really kind of back up what we've been talking about. So some of these, I'm going to talk about these comprehensive reform models that have been throughout the United States. So Success for All, for instance, is a comprehensive reform model that uses cooperative learning, tutoring, family support services, and extensive professional development to help high poverty schools to succeed with their students. They were built for high poverty schools. They provide cooperative learning, tutoring service, extension of professional support, and family services support. So they were intentional at hitting it from all different angles, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, connecting with the community, getting the funds that they needed, and then providing these specific systemic services that were intentionally designed to support these families that needed it. Also, CRESPAR is another one, Center for Research on the Education of Students Placed at Risk. So these CRESPAR provides programs and policies that were designed to help at-risk students. Their goal was to provide conceptual advances and practical solutions to reduce the gap in academic performance. Students that entered school with great promises but were placed at risk due to insufficient or inappropriate responses, they took care of those and they met those students where they were. Also, another thing that these culturally reform models do, they're culturally consistent and making sure that instruction is beneficial to African American students and students of color. Further, another one that I wanted to point out for you too is that we had a Tennessee class size study, and it talked about how there was like a longitudinal follow up, and what they did was they showed that African American students significantly benefited the most from these type of comprehensive programs. So these are some things here. And definitely you can reach out to me because I would love to provide more research on these. Now, let's continue to talk about solutions for equitable instruction and equitable ways of work in classrooms. So we have here effective instruction for all students. Slavin and Madden, they found in their research, they talked about comprehensive models. Okay, they talked about how in 1988 there was a school development project. Then 1996 there was a direct instruction project, and that was used for Title I schools, and all of that was an example that led up to the success for all model. Okay, and now the good thing about the success for all model, so we talked about it in the previous slide, the great thing is that now it's in over 1,600 schools and in over 48 states. So it's really starting to evolve because it's a model that works. And so with that said, I want to now also talk to you guys about other things you can do for effective instruction for all students, and that is closing the achievement gap. So there's two ways that you can do that. One, giving African American students more effective instruction, and then of course differential positive effect of achievement, meaning really being intentional at taking your time when teaching students of color, making sure that they're understanding, making sure that you're connecting the dots, making sure that they can relate to you, that you're personable, you're approachable, which, that's what every educator is doing every day, of course. And then, of course, just looking at that positive effect of achievement and making sure that that is being dispersed throughout for students of color. Also, some other things to consider was the Tennessee Value Added Assessment Center. They looked into this and they found in 1998 that the gains for African American Black students went up from 64.2% to 78.9% when they used comprehensive models like the ones that were mentioned here in this presentation. Now, I want to talk about another solution. So another solution includes providing policies for equity and change. So for instance, Hillsborough County down in Florida, they provided a racial equity policy in 2017. Honorable board member at the time, Susan Valdez, and the superintendent leadership team, they compiled and approved a racial equity policy that was for all students and staff in Hillsborough County. The purpose of it was to serve students so that they would deserve respectful learning environments in which racial or ethnic diversity is actually valued, and it contributed to the success of their academic outcomes. It also confronted any types of racism. It also helped to understand and address any other kind of institutional racisms and things like that were in achievement. And I took this exactly from their page, and also acknowledged complex societal and historical factors that contributed to inequities throughout the school district. So what did they do to provide equity and change? Let's look into it. So first things first, they eliminated systemic disparities. They invited and included people from all races to sit at the table, to examine issues, to find adaptive solutions, and to address root causes and systems. Okay. They ensured a systemic equity. They implemented and led from a system-wide racial equity plan, and it stood on three pillars: family, student and community engagement, and leadership in teaching and learning. Further, they looked at their family, student, and community engagement. They intentionally sought out and included students of multiple racial perspectives in the development and in the implementation of culturally responsive teaching and learning practices and curriculum. Another thing they did is they looked at their leadership. How could they recruit, employ, support, and retain a workforce that was racially just blended and racially conscious, and had cultural competent administrative, instructional, and support personnel? They looked at their teaching and learning, and they said, we need to ensure a positive and academically rigorous school environment that engages all students, collaborates as teachers and administrators to create and implement culturally responsive institutional practices, curriculum, and assessments. And they also looked at the implementation and monitoring system-wide racial equity plan with a clear accountability and metrics, in which they followed up with fidelity to make sure that it was being implemented fairly across the board for all students and teachers. So, in conclusion, when you are trying to make sure that equity counts, we must make sure that there's equity in all levels of leadership. We have to make sure that there's equitable practices. Do we understand the research? Do we understand what took place, Brown versus Board of Education, and then moving beyond? Have we been able to address the various inequities that exist in our school districts and, for our students of color or students of various linguistic backgrounds? Are we looking at the overall data that it's going to take over 200 years to close that achievement gap? And if so, then what are we going to do to contribute to that so that we can close that gap effectively? Can we make sure that we're implementing innovative teaching practices like mentioned in this presentation? And then can we also look at some comprehensive reform models and some equity policies throughout our school districts and throughout our state to make sure that we are being intentional and proactive at closing that gap? Have we been able to address our own biases to say, okay, this is where I'm at. This is the area of focus for me. And then are we able to then find out how can we be a mentor support and an advocate for all students, no matter their background or their, linguistic differences and whatnot. These are some things that we want to do whenever we are truly thriving for equity in the classroom. So with that said, I want you to think about your questions and comments. And then, of course, I'm going to give you guys time and we'll give you my information to reach out to me because I would absolutely love to reconnect with all of you. So if you're interested in meeting up with me after this course, this presentation, if you want to know about big ideas, National Geographic Learning, or Florida Department of Education or whatnot, you could also request for me to come and speak at your school. If you want me to do professional development, a workshop, or just present something, some research, or to look at the data with you, you can reach me at iwhite@larsonstext.com or at india.white.123@gmail.com. My website is www.india-white.com. And then you can follow me on social media. So LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Facebook is Miss India White. Instagram is Indie238. YouTube is India White 123. And so I would absolutely love to connect with you guys. So with that said, I just don't want you to be a stranger. Let's continue to, do great work together. Let's continue to affect schools together. And I will be here for you. If you would like a copy of any of this work, I'm here for you, and we'll get that provided to you as well. So with that said, have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, and let's connect.